Every lawn mowed to exactly 2.5 inches. Every mailbox painted in one of 7 approved colors. Every driveway sealed and resealed on a municipal schedule that made some residents wonder if the HOA board members actually worked for the city or if the city worked for them. Marcus Webb had moved into 427 Hearthstone Lane 3 months ago, and he'd already received 4 violation notices. The first was for his car, a 2019 Honda Civic, which apparently was cosmetically mismatched because he'd replaced the passenger door after an accident. The replacement part was from a salvage yard, perfect condition, but slightly different shade of blue. Corinne Hendricks, the HOA president, had personally delivered the notice while he was still unloading boxes. The second violation was for his mailbox flag hanging at a 47-degree angle instead of 45 degrees. He wasn't joking. They'd measured it. The third was for his grass height, 2.7 inches, 7/10 of an inch over code. The fourth was for unsightly outdoor clutter, his own moving boxes, stacked neatly against his garage for the first 2 weeks. Marcus was a patient man by nature. He'd spent 15 years as a civil engineer dealing with city permits and bureaucratic nightmares. He understood rules. He understood structure. He understood that communities needed standards, but there was a difference between standards and tyranny, and Ridgemont Valley had long since crossed that line. On a Saturday morning in late August, Marcus sat in his kitchen with his laptop open, scrolling through the HOA bylaws for the 100th time, searching for some loophole, some inconsistency, some miracle that would explain why he was paying $287 per month for the privilege of being harassed. Still reading those things, his sister Diane appeared in his kitchen doorway with 2 cups of coffee. She was visiting from the city, and she'd spent the weekend witnessing the absurdity of Ridgemont Valley firsthand. She'd watched Corinne Hendricks walk past Marcus's house with a ruler, an actual ruler, measuring something in his front garden. "There has to be something in here," Marcus said, accepting the coffee. "Some inconsistency, some rule they're breaking that would prove this entire system is corrupt." "They're probably breaking every rule," Diane said, settling into the chair across from him. "Just not in ways you can document. That's how people like Corinne Hendricks operate. They write the rules so they're the only ones who can bend them." Marcus had learned enough about Corinne Hendricks in 3 months to know this was likely true. She lived 3 streets over in a house called Ridgemont Manor, the largest property in the community, with a guest house, a pool, and a tennis court. Her husband, Derek, was rarely seen. He apparently spent most of his time at their condo in the city. Their 2 adult children and various grandchildren used the property like a resort. There were constant weekend parties, catering trucks in the driveway, rental equipment being delivered. And yet somehow, none of this violated any HOA codes. The pool, though, that had become Marcus's obsession. He discovered it 3 weeks ago during an evening walk. The community pool, the one listed in the bylaws that all residents paid for through their monthly fees, was technically open to all residents. But it had hours, strict hours, and it was almost never actually open. The gate was always locked, always guarded, and the sign always read, "Closed for maintenance." Meanwhile, Corinne's private pool was visible from the street, sparkling in the sun, hosting family gatherings every weekend. Marcus had asked about the community pool during the last mandatory HOA meeting. Corinne had smiled that particular smile of hers, the one that said she was about to explain something very simple to someone very stupid, and explained that the pool required specialized maintenance protocols and was only available for scheduled community events. When Marcus asked when the next event would be, Corinne said the board would be reviewing the calendar at their private sessions, and residents would be notified. No residents were ever notified. "I think I'm going to file a formal complaint," Marcus said, turning his laptop toward Diane. "Look at this section, Article 7, subsection 12. All amenities funded by HOA fees must be available to all residents on a rotating basis, with a maximum closure period of 30 consecutive days except in cases of emergency. The community pool has been closed for 157 days. Diane leaned over reading. "That's pretty clear-cut." "Right, I have photos, timestamps, HOA meeting minutes where no emergency was discussed, nothing. This is..." A sharp knock on the door interrupted him. Both siblings froze. Something about the knock, aggressive, authoritative, suggested nothing good. Marcus opened the door to find Derek Hendricks standing on his porch, holding a piece of paper. Derek was tan, silver-haired, wearing clothes that looked expensive. He had the posture of someone accustomed to having his way. "Morning, Marcus." Derek's tone suggested they were old friends, which they absolutely were not. "Got a minute?" Marcus stepped aside and let him in. Diane gave Marcus a look that clearly said this should be good. Derek didn't sit. He handed Marcus the paper, an HOA violation notice, of course. "Your sister's vehicle," Derek said pleasantly. "It's been parked at your residence for 37 hours. HOA rules state that guest vehicles can only park for 24 consecutive hours without approval. Overnight guests need to register their vehicles." Marcus felt something hot rise in his chest. "You've got to be kidding me." "I wish I was," Derek said with theatrical sympathy. "Corinne's been more than patient with you, Marcus. Most residents get the picture within a month or two, but you've got some kind of vendetta going on. The broken mailbox flag, the grass height incidents. Now you're asking pointed questions in meetings, digging through bylaws like you're a lawyer, and frankly, it's starting to feel like you're trying to create problems instead of just following community standards." "Following community standards?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "Derek, your wife has been measuring my grass with a ruler, my mailbox flag. Your family throws parties constantly, and yet I get violations for my moving boxes." "Your moving boxes are eyesores," Derek said simply. "They detract from the community aesthetic, and they've been gone for weeks now, so clearly the system works." "The system," Diane interjected from the kitchen, her voice tight, "is insane." Derek barely glanced at her. "Corinne mentioned you have some concerns about the community pool. I want to address that directly. That pool is closed because we're doing significant renovations. We've hired a contractor, work is scheduled, and it will be much improved when it reopens." "When exactly?" Marcus asked. "When it's ready," Derek said, smiling. "We don't work on other people's timelines out here." After Derek left, Marcus stared at the violation notice. The casual cruelty of it, targeting his sister's vehicle just to send a message, crystallized something in him. He'd been trying to work within the system. He'd been trying to be reasonable, but reasonable people couldn't negotiate with autocrats. That night, Marcus did something he probably shouldn't have. He made copies of every HOA meeting minute for the past 4 years. He filed an FOIA request with the county for all renovation permits associated with the community pool. He downloaded satellite imagery of the pool from Google Maps over a 6-year span. He documented every violation notice he'd received. On his living room wall, he created a timeline on printer paper and string, like a conspiracy theorist. Diane found him at 1 a.m., connecting dots between typed accusations and dated photographs. "You're obsessing," she said gently. "I'm documenting," Marcus corrected. "Same thing, this isn't healthy, Mark. They're trolls. The best response is to ignore them or move." "I paid $450,000 for this house," Marcus said. "I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not being a victim of bullying just because Corinne Hendricks and her family decided I'm not worth respecting." But even as he said it, he knew Diane was right about one thing. He was obsessing. He couldn't stop checking the satellite imagery, couldn't stop pulling permits, couldn't stop waiting for the moment when he'd have irrefutable proof that something was wrong in Ridgemont Valley. The proof came 3 weeks later. Marcus was jogging through the neighborhood at dawn, a habit he'd started specifically so Corinne wouldn't catch him violating the personal fitness equipment should not be visible from the street rule, when he noticed something odd at the community pool entrance. The gate was partially open, and there was a gap in the perimeter fence where an old board was loose. His engineer's brain registered it immediately: structural compromise. The fence was deteriorating. He stopped, catching his breath, and peered through the gap. The pool was completely empty. Not in a being drained for maintenance way. The deep end had cracked tiles, algae stains on the walls, and what looked like 4 years of dirt accumulation. It wasn't being renovated. It had been abandoned. Marcus's heart rate picked up. He pulled out his phone and took photos through the gap, careful not to trespass, just documenting. The emptiness, the neglect, the complete abandonment of a community amenity that every resident paid $287 per month to maintain. Something was very, very wrong. When Marcus got home, he was still in his running clothes, still buzzing with adrenaline, when he found another violation notice taped to his mailbox. Unsightly appearance during outdoor recreation activities. Personal fitness routines should not be visible from community streets. Please ensure all future exercise is conducted in private spaces. Karen had watched him jogging in his own neighborhood and issued a citation. That was when Marcus stopped trying to play by the rules. Marcus took a personal day on Monday and drove to the county records office in the city, a beige building near the courthouse that smelled like old paper and disappointment. The clerk, a woman named Susan with cat-eye glasses and remarkable patience, pulled every record related to Ridgemont Valley HOA since its incorporation in 1989. What he found was methodical, calculated embezzlement. The community pool's budget line item showed annual maintenance costs of $15,000 per year for repairs and upkeep. In reality, the pool hadn't been maintained in 4 years. The last entry was 2020. Contractor paid $12,500 for resurfacing and regrouting. But the photographs in Marcus's pocket, taken just hours ago, showed zero evidence of recent resurfacing. The pool looked like it had been abandoned since the pandemic shut everything down. Someone, Susan said, adjusting her glasses as she scanned the budget, was pocketing that money. Karen Hendricks, Marcus asked. Or whoever signed off on the payments, Susan replied. HOA boards can be surprisingly opaque about financial audits. Technically, boards need to provide financial statements to residents annually, but enforcement is weak. Very weak. Marcus's next stop was the county assessor's office, where he discovered something even more interesting. The land that Ridgemont Valley sat on, all 42 acres, had a complicated history. The development was only 34 years old, but the property itself had older claims. In 1987, when the HOA incorporated, it had purchased the land from a development company that went bankrupt. But before that purchase, the property had belonged to something called the Ridgemont Community Trust. From 1964 to 1987, Marcus pulled those records with trembling hands. The Ridgemont Community Trust had been a cooperative housing development started by a philanthropic organization. It was community-owned property, not privately developed. The residents who'd lived there between 1964 and 1987 had maintained it collectively, made decisions democratically, shared resources. Then, in 1987, the trustees had decided to sell the land to a development company that promised preservation of the community character while modernizing infrastructure. What actually happened was the development company carved it into lots, sold them individually, created an HOA to manage shared amenities, and handed control to a board of elected residents, who immediately stopped viewing themselves as servants of the community and started viewing themselves as autocrats. The records were archived on microfiche. Marcus sat in a plastic chair in the records office basement, illuminated by the pale glow of the machine, and photographed every document with his phone. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice someone had come into the basement until a voice said, "You're doing research on Ridgemont Valley." Marcus spun around. It was an elderly man, probably in his mid-70s, wearing a cardigan and holding his own stack of microfiche request slips. He had a kind face, weathered by time, and eyes that suggested he'd been expecting to find someone like Marcus down here eventually. "I am," Marcus said carefully. "Do you know something about it?" "I lived there," the man said. "From 1968 to 1986, I was on the original trust board when we decided to sell." He extended his hand. "Raymond Colton." Marcus shook his hand, which was warm and slightly trembling. "Marcus Webb, I'm trying to figure out what happened to the community pool." "The pool," Raymond repeated. He smiled sadly and pulled up a chair. "That pool was something special. We built it ourselves in 1973. Entire community working together. Raised funds, organized volunteers, did most of the labor ourselves. It was the heart of Ridgemont, the place where everyone gathered. Families, kids, elderly residents. It was really something." "What happened to it?" "When we sold to the development company, we had protections written in," Raymond explained. "The pool had to remain open to all residents at a reasonable rate. The amenities had to be maintained as shared resources. We weren't naive. We knew a corporation would eventually take over, but we tried to protect what we'd built." "The protection didn't work," Marcus said. "No," Raymond agreed. "I fought them on it, you know. When the first HOA board took over, I attended those early meetings, tried to remind them of what the pool meant, what the community was supposed to be. But people like Karen Hendricks saw the pool as an obstacle. It cost money to maintain. It attracted people from outside the community. It was inefficient. So they just stopped maintaining it. Technically, they claimed it needed repair work that was too expensive. They shut it down for emergency maintenance sometime in 2020, right when everything was locked down anyway. By the time lockdowns ended, they'd already written into the minutes that the pool required extensive renovation before reopening. That was 4 years ago. Marcus felt something click into place. They've been stealing the maintenance budget. I'd need to see the financial records to confirm it, but yes, that would be my assumption, Raymond said. This is why I came down here today, actually. Got a call from an old friend who still lives in Ridgemont. She told me about you, the resident who's been asking questions, getting violation notices. She said you were the first person in years who seemed to care enough to push back. I'm trying to, Marcus said, but I'm not sure what I can do. The HOA board effectively controls everything. Not everything, Raymond said, standing with some effort. Come with me. Raymond led Marcus to a different section of the archives. He knew exactly where to go, section 1964-1989, Historical Records of the Ridgemont Community Trust. When we officially transferred the property in 1987, we filed a deed that included a covenant, Raymond explained, pulling a thick manila folder from the archive. It was supposed to be binding. It stated that the amenities, specifically the pool, the community center, and the shared green spaces, would remain perpetually available to all community residents at cost, never to be exclusively managed or restricted by any single party or governing body. He opened the folder and pointed to a document, faded but official, notarized and recorded. That's still binding, Raymond continued. Covenants like this don't expire. Unless the current HOA formally petitions the county to remove the covenant, which requires community vote and public notification, that pool cannot legally remain closed to residents. Marcus photographed the document with his phone, his hands now visibly shaking. They're in violation of an official covenant. Flagrantly, Raymond agreed. And if they've been collecting maintenance fees without maintaining the pool, that's fraud. Why hasn't anyone done anything about this? Marcus asked. Because most people don't know, Raymond said. The old covenant was filed in 1987 and then basically forgotten. It's not in the HOA bylaws, those were written fresh by the new board. You have to dig through county records from the original trust to find it. Most residents don't think to do that. They just assume the board is operating legally. And Karen Hendricks probably didn't even know about it, Marcus said slowly. She might have genuinely thought she could close the pool down for maintenance. She might have, Raymond agreed. But 4 years of maintenance fees going unpaid while the pool sits abandoned. Even if it started as ignorance, that's become fraud now. She and the board know that pool is closed. They know residents are paying for it, and they're choosing not to maintain it or reopen it. Marcus left the records office with photocopies of the covenant, photographs of the archived documents, and Raymond's contact information. His mind was already organizing the evidence, planning the next move. That evening, he called an emergency meeting with himself and his laptop. He created a document, the covenant, the budget records, the satellite imagery showing the pool's abandonment, the maintenance fees collected over 4 years that amounted to over $35,000 in resident money. He also sent an email to Raymond, asking if he'd be willing to testify about the original covenant and the trust's intent. Raymond replied within 30 minutes. Absolutely, this has bothered me for 30 years. I'm ready to help make this right. The next morning, Marcus filed a formal complaint with the county assessor's office, citing the unbreached covenant and requesting an official investigation into HOA fund management. He also sent registered letters to every resident of Ridgemont Valley, including copies of the covenant, documentation of the maintenance fund, and the satellite imagery. He explained the violation in clear, unemotional language. He provided his contact information and invited residents to join him in demanding the pool be reopened and the board be held accountable. He was careful not to accuse anyone of criminal activity. He simply presented facts. Then he waited. The response came faster than he expected. On Friday of that week, there was a special HOA meeting, mandatory attendance. Corinne Hendricks called the meeting to order with a tone that suggested she'd been storing rage for exactly this moment. The community center was packed, nearly every resident in attendance, most looking confused about why they'd been summoned on such short notice. "I want to address the absolutely baseless allegations that have been circulating," Corinne began, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Our community pool underwent assessment in 2020 and was found to require extensive structural repairs. Those repairs are expensive and time-consuming. The board made a fiscally responsible decision to properly fund those repairs before reopening rather than cut corners." "Where's the repair contract?" Marcus called out from the back. The entire room turned to look at him. "Excuse me," Corinne's smile became dangerous. "The repair contract," Marcus repeated, standing now. "If you've hired a contractor to repair the pool, that contract should be available in the public records. It should be in the HOA meeting minutes. I've reviewed every meeting minute from the past 4 years. There is no contractor listed, no project timeline, no assessment report. Nothing." "That's because the assessment and planning are still ongoing," Corinne said, her voice dripping with condescension. "These things take time, Marcus. Not everyone rushes into every decision like some people." "They take 4 years." Marcus pulled out a folder. "I have the original deed covenant from 1987 that requires this pool to remain open to residents. I have budget records showing you've collected $35,000 in maintenance fees while the pool sits abandoned. I have satellite imagery documenting that nothing has been done to it since 2020. The community center went quiet. "That covenant is outdated and doesn't reflect current legal structures," Derek Hendricks called out from the front row. He was standing now, too. "The modern HOA structure supersedes those old restrictions." "No, it doesn't," Marcus said, with the confidence of someone who'd spent the last 72 hours researching property law. "Covenants are binding. They don't expire. They don't get superseded by newer bylaws, unless this board petitions the county to formally dissolve the covenant, which would require community vote and public notice. You are legally required to maintain that pool and keep it open to residents." "We're not discussing this in an open meeting," Corinne said sharply. "The board will review these allegations and respond appropriately. This meeting is adjourned." "You can adjourn," Marcus said, "but I've also filed a formal complaint with the county assessor's office and sent copies of the covenant to every resident. So the discussion is happening whether you're in the room or not." As people stood up to leave, clusters of residents gravitated toward Marcus, asking questions, asking for copies of the documents, expressing anger that had apparently been simmering beneath the surface for years. One woman approached him, Linda Chang, who lived 5 doors down from him, with tears in her eyes. "My daughter had an asthma attack last week," Linda said. "I was so frustrated because we have a pool that we're paying for that she can't use. I've been trying to get some kind of summer activity for her, and I have been paying for this pool that's locked up, and I didn't know I could do something about it." By the time the meeting fully dispersed, Marcus had 30 residents asking for more information. The next Monday morning, his doorbell rang at 6:47 a.m. It was a sheriff's deputy with a sealed envelope. Marcus had been served with legal notice. The HOA was suing him for defamation, slander, and harassment of board members. The suit claimed that Marcus had distributed false and damaging information intended to harm the reputation of the board. The amount they were seeking, $75,000. Marcus's stomach dropped. He was still holding the envelope when his phone rang. It was Raymond. "They're suing you?" Raymond asked, his voice immediately concerned. "Yeah." "Don't worry," Raymond said. "I've already called a lawyer, a friend of mine from church who does pro bono work for residents' rights cases. He specializes in HOA disputes. You have a legitimate complaint based on documented covenant violations. Suing you for bringing that to light is called a SLAPP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. They're illegal in this state. The court will likely dismiss it immediately." Relief washed through Marcus, then came the anger. They weren't trying to address the violations. They weren't trying to fix the problem. They were trying to silence him through intimidation and legal threat. That was when Marcus understood that he wasn't dealing with just rule-breaking anymore. He was dealing with corruption. Systemic, entrenched corruption that had made a small group of people comfortable with abuse. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus found himself back at the community pool. The fence had gaps in it, easy enough to slip through. The empty pool was eerie in the moonlight. The cracked tiles, the algae, the 4 years of abandonment. He stood at the deep end, imagining what it had been like when Raymond helped build it. A community project, a gathering place, a source of pride for people who'd worked together to create something. And then it had been stolen. Not with violence or force, but with bureaucratic indifference, with the slow strangulation of shared resources, with the conversion of community into commodity. As Marcus stood there in the dark, he made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't going to just fight this in court. He wasn't going to just expose the covenant violation. He was going to dig deeper into every financial record, every contract, every decision the board had made. Because something told him that the pool wasn't the only thing that had been abandoned. Raymond's lawyer, Thomas Keefe, was a man in his 60s with graying hair and the demeanor of someone who'd spent his career fighting battles against powerful entities and was thoroughly tired of their tactics. Their first meeting took place in his office, modest, cluttered with case files, decorated with the kind of furniture that had been donated to his cause. "The SLAPP suit is easy to dismiss," Thomas said, reviewing Marcus's documents. "But that's almost beside the point. The real issue is the covenant and the fraud. If we can prove they've been systematically misappropriating funds designated for pool maintenance, we can pursue civil claims. Possibly criminal ones too, depending on how the board structured their theft." "What do you need?" Marcus asked. "Everything," Thomas said simply. "I need the complete financial records for the HOA going back to 1987, not just the pool maintenance line items, but everything. Money tends to move in patterns. If they're stealing from one budget, they're probably stealing from others, and I need to know if they've filed false reports with the county." "How do I get that?" "You request it," Thomas said. "As a member of the community, you have the right to audit HOA financial records. Most HOAs try to make this difficult, but the law is clear. File a certified request." Marcus did, sending a registered letter to the HOA requesting access to all financial records dating back to the community's incorporation. The response came 5 days later. They would make the records available for review at the HOA office on a specific date and time, and Marcus was permitted to view them but not photograph or copy them. "That's illegal," Thomas said when Marcus reported the restriction. "You have a right to documentation. They can't prevent copying. I'll send them a letter." The next day, the HOA's lawyer, a corporate firm called Winters and Associates, responded with a cease and desist order, claiming that Marcus's investigation constituted harassment and that any further attempts to access records, contact residents, or investigate board activities would result in additional legal action. "They're panicking," Thomas observed, reading the cease and desist with something like satisfaction. "They know they're in trouble. Cease and desist orders don't stop people from reviewing financial records they're legally entitled to see. They're just trying to intimidate you." But Marcus was already intimidated. The lawsuit, the cease and desist, the escalating hostility, it was wearing on him. He wasn't sleeping well. His work was suffering. He'd taken enough personal days that his boss had started asking questions. It was Diane who suggested he hire a forensic accountant. "You're right that something's wrong with the money," she said one evening, "but you're not qualified to prove it. Get someone who is. Someone who can look at the financial records and draw conclusions that a court will accept." The accountant came recommended through Thomas, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in HOA fraud cases. Sarah was meticulous, patient, and devastatingly thorough. She spent 2 weeks reviewing the HOA records that Marcus finally managed to photograph during an authorized viewing session at the HOA office. The restrictions on copying didn't prevent him from taking photographs, and Sarah had simply given him her camera and a plan. What she found was worse than fraud. It was systematic embezzlement. "The pool maintenance budget isn't the only one," Sarah reported, pulling up spreadsheets on Marcus's laptop. "Look at landscaping. The contract was with a company called Ridgemont Grounds LLC. That company is owned by Derek Hendricks. The bids for the landscaping work started at $3,000 per month in 2015 and have now reached $8,500 per month for the same work. In 2015, the landscaping looked exactly like it looks now." Sarah clicked to another file. "Community Center Utilities, overbilled by approximately $400 per month based on comparable properties in the area. Gate repairs, contracted out to a company that somehow exists only on paper. No actual employees, no business license, but somehow $15,000 in annual payments. Insurance. The board renewed with a broker who happens to be married to board member Patricia Rooney. The premiums tripled with no increase in coverage. Marcus felt sick. How much are we talking about? Over the 4-year period, I can definitively document approximately $180,000 in fraudulent or significantly inflated charges, Sarah said. The pool is just the most visible example. The real theft is distributed across multiple lines, which is why it took so long to notice. Can you prove it? To a court, absolutely. This is amateurish embezzlement, Marcus. They covered their tracks with the assumption that no one would actually audit them. Most residents never do. Thomas took the report to the state attorney general's office, which launched an investigation into the HOA's financial practices. 3 weeks later, the Ridgemont Valley HOA's lawyer called requesting a settlement meeting. The meeting took place in a conference room in downtown. Thomas representing Marcus, Winters, and Associates representing the HOA board. The offer was simple. Marcus would drop his complaint to the state, stop contacting residents, and agree to a non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, the HOA would drop their defamation suit and offer him $25,000 in damages. $25,000, Marcus said. You've stolen $180,000 from the residents. That's not established, the lawyer, a slick man named Ronald Winters, replied calmly. And even if it were, my client's board members are insulated from personal liability. The HOA is a corporation. Any settlement would be from the HOA's general fund, which is the residents' money. So you'd essentially be taking money from the community. My clients think the generous settlement offer demonstrates their willingness to compromise despite your unfounded allegations. Marcus wanted to reach across the table and flip it. No, he said instead. I'm not signing anything. The state is investigating. Residents deserve to know what happened to their money. Then you'll lose more time and money in court, Winters said, because the SLAPP suit will be dismissed, but my clients can still pursue a defamation claim, and we have very deep pockets. So can we, Thomas said pleasantly. And I've already filed a countersuit for fraud and fiduciary breach. You want to keep this in court? Let's keep it in court. The meeting ended without resolution. But something had shifted in Marcus's thinking. He didn't care anymore about winning the lawsuit or proving the embezzlement to a court. That would take years and accomplish nothing except making lawyers richer. What he cared about now was justice, real, immediate, public justice. He contacted Linda Cheng, the woman whose daughter had the asthma attack. I want to organize a residents' action, he told her. I want to present this information to the community and force a vote. We can recall the board and install a new one that's actually accountable. Linda was immediately interested. She helped Marcus identify other engaged residents, people who cared about their community and were disgusted by the embezzlement. Over the next 3 weeks, they organized meetings in homes, created informational packets, and gathered signatures. Sarah the accountant created visual presentations that made the fraud impossible to deny, pie charts showing where the money went, timelines of inflated costs, comparisons to industry standards. By the time they called for a special meeting to discuss a recall vote, they had signatures from 60% of the community. The board couldn't prevent it. The bylaws, which Karen herself had written, actually allowed for resident recall if a sufficient number of homeowners petitioned. It was scheduled for the following Saturday. The night before the meeting, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Raymond, about the original community trust, about the pool that had been built with neighbors working together, about how quickly that kind of thing could be corrupted. He walked over to the pool one more time in the pre-dawn darkness. The gate was still partially open. He slipped through and stood at the edge of the empty basin. Tomorrow, he thought, it could be different. Tomorrow, residents could take back their community. But as he stood there, thinking about victory that felt somehow empty, his engineer's eye caught something odd. There was a spot in the pool's floor, near the deep end wall, where the tile pattern seemed different. Not new or older. The original tiles there were cracked in a different way, and the grout showed a different depth. It looked like something had been covered up, like something had been buried there. Marcus was so tired and so focused on the meeting ahead that he almost walked past it. But his engineer's brain was insistent. That area didn't match the rest of the pool. It had been modified. He made a mental note to come back with better lighting. Tomorrow, after the recall vote, he'd investigate. The recall vote was devastating for the Hendricks family. Karen was removed with 87% of the community voting against her continuation. Derek, Patricia Rooney, and 2 other board members were also voted out. Only 3 original board members retained their seats, people who'd apparently been following orders without participating in the financial crimes. By a new vote, Linda Chang was elected as the interim HOA president, and Thomas Keefe was contracted as the legal advisor to oversee reforms. The first thing the new board did was commission a structural assessment of the community pool. The previous board's claim that it needed expensive repairs was examined, and the inspection found that while the pool did need restoration, it was not structurally unsound. Renovation could happen in a matter of weeks, not years. "It's like they told you a story and just kept repeating it," Linda said during the first new board meeting. "They convinced everyone that the pool was broken beyond repair, when actually they just didn't want to deal with maintaining it." "Which is perfect," Thomas said, "because intent matters in fraud cases. The state attorney general's office is now treating this as a full criminal investigation. They're looking at whether the board intentionally misrepresented the pool's condition to justify collecting maintenance fees without maintaining it." Marcus attended the meeting, though he was no longer the driving force. That role had naturally passed to Linda and the engaged residents who'd worked to create change. Marcus was just relieved, tired but relieved. After the meeting, as the new board was discussing timeline for pool repairs, Marcus asked for a moment with Linda. "I want to show you something," he said. "At the pool, the old pool, tonight." That evening, Marcus and Linda went to the pool with flashlights and a suspicion. Marcus led her to the section of floor that had caught his attention. Under the bright beam of the flashlight, the difference was even more obvious. The tile grout was shallower there, the pattern misaligned with the rest. "Something's underneath this," Marcus said. "You think the previous board buried something?" Linda asked. "I think someone did. Maybe not them, maybe years ago." They called Raymond, who came immediately with a shovel from his garage. "This is exciting," Raymond said, with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been living a quiet retirement and had just been invited to participate in archaeological discovery. "What are we looking for?" "I have no idea," Marcus admitted. The 3 of them worked carefully, clearing dirt away from the pool's edge near the affected floor section. As they dug, the tile work continued downward farther than it should have, covered in soil and algae. Then the shovel hit something solid. "Metal." Raymond and Marcus cleared away more soil, and a metal box emerged, corroded, green with oxidation, and approximately 2 feet by 2 feet by 1 foot deep. "Jesus," Linda whispered. They carefully extracted the box from the soil. It was locked, but the lock was entirely rusted through. When Marcus applied pressure, the lock simply disintegrated. Inside was layers of plastic sheeting, waterproof to preserve whatever was beneath. Raymond carefully unfolded the plastic. Old photographs, dozens of them, black and white, faded but clearly depicting the pool's construction. Men and women working together, building wooden frames, mixing concrete, collaborating on a community project. And in several of the photos, the same faces kept appearing. One man in particular, who looked to be the lead on the project, photographed at various stages of construction. Beneath the photographs were documents. Articles of incorporation for the Ridgemont Community Trust, meeting minutes, letters of correspondence between the trust and the city. And something else, a handwritten diary, entries dating from 1973. The first entry was dated June 15, 1973. "Today we broke ground on the community pool. Every family contributed something, time, money, materials. Sarah made lemonade for the workers. The Kowalskis donated cement. The Johnsons provided labor. This pool is our community made physical. It represents what we can do together. I never want this to be forgotten." The entries continued through the construction, but then, 3 months in, the tone shifted. A developer from the city came to today's meeting. He wants to buy the land, offered a substantial sum. Some residents are interested. I argued that we don't need his money, we've built something valuable without him. But the allure of profit is strong. More entries followed, showing an internal conflict. Some residents wanted to sell and take the money. Others wanted to preserve the community as it was. Ultimately, a vote was taken. The community chose to sell, but with protections. The pool would remain public property, maintained in perpetuity, open to all residents. The final entry, dated December 1987, just before the sale was finalized. Today we signed over the deed. The community trust is dissolving. New owners will manage the property, but the pool is protected by covenant. I'm burying this record in a waterproof box beneath the pool's floor so that future generations will remember what we built, how we did it together, and that this place is supposed to be for the people. Future residents should know that this pool came from sacrifice and cooperation, not from profit and developers. If anyone ever tries to take this away, let them know what it cost to build it and what it means. The entry was signed, Thomas Ridgemont, Community Trust President. "Oh my God," Linda breathed. "It's a time capsule. He buried a time capsule." Raymond was crying silently, staring at the photographs. "I knew Thomas," he said quietly. "He was on the trust with me. He passed away in 2004. I didn't know he'd done this." Marcus photographed everything: the box, the diary, the photographs, the documents. His engineer's mind was already working through the implications. They carefully cleaned the items and began the process of documenting everything officially. Thomas Keefe was contacted, and he brought in a historical preservation society to authenticate the materials. By Monday morning, the local news had picked up the story. Hidden time capsule found AT community pool. REVALS 50-year-old truth about RIDGMONT Valley. The articles were sympathetic to Marcus, to the residents, to the history of the community. And they were absolutely brutal toward Corinne Hendricks and Derek. HOA board attempted to erase community history, evidence SUGGSDS. Embezzlement DISCOVRED RIDGMONT Valley. Pool abandoned 4 DECADES. Community activist UNCOVERS fraud while fighting for RESIDENTS rights. Corinne and Derek were interviewed briefly by reporters. Derek maintained that they'd done nothing wrong. Corinne said they were victims of a witch hunt and that Marcus Webb was obsessed with causing trouble. But the public opinion had shifted entirely. The state attorney general announced expanded criminal charges: fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, all directed at Corinne Hendricks and Derek personally. On a Tuesday afternoon, 6 weeks after Marcus had first noticed the gap in the fence and tried to photograph the abandoned pool, Corinne Hendricks' house was raided by state police executing a search warrant for financial records. Marcus watched from his front porch as evidence was carried out in boxes. Derek Hendricks, it turned out, was not present. He'd somehow managed to leave the state just before the search warrant was issued. The state issued a warrant for his arrest, and Interpol began investigating the possibility of international flight to avoid prosecution. The community pool, meanwhile, became something else entirely, a symbol. The time capsule was properly preserved and put on display in the community center. Thomas Ridgemont's diary was photocopied and distributed to every resident. The photographs of the original construction, showing neighbors working together, building something valuable, were framed and displayed in the pool area. The pool's renovation began immediately. Marcus was invited to attend the groundbreaking ceremony. When he arrived, he was genuinely shocked. Nearly 200 residents were there. The state attorney general had sent a representative to make an official statement about the investigation. The local mayor was there, the county assessor, Thomas the lawyer, Raymond, Linda, and dozens of residents who'd come to watch their community pool be reclaimed. "This is about more than a pool," the mayor said, speaking to the assembled crowd. "This is about residents refusing to be victimized by corruption. Marcus Webb showed us that one person with access to information and the willingness to ask questions can change everything. Thank you, Marcus." Marcus accepted the gratitude with genuine discomfort. He hadn't wanted to be a hero, he just wanted to use the pool. As the ceremony concluded and people dispersed, Linda pulled him aside. "The board wants you to know something," she said. "The money recovered from the HOA, the $180,000 in fraudulent charges, we're putting it toward pool improvements. New features, expanded hours, and were creating a scholarship fund for kids whose families can't afford pool memberships, in honor of what Thomas Ridgemont wrote in his diary about community and sacrifice. Marcus smiled. It was the right thing to do. That evening, after everyone had left, Marcus went to the pool alone. The excavation site had been carefully sealed. The time capsule box, now cleaned and stabilized, was in a climate-controlled display case in the community center. But the pool itself remained empty, waiting for renovation to begin. Marcus stood at the edge and tried to imagine it full again, children splashing, adults doing laps, families gathered on a summer afternoon. The way Raymond had described it, the way Thomas Ridgemont had intended it to be. He thought about the cost of community, not the monetary cost, but the emotional cost, the labor cost, the sacrifice cost, and how quickly that sacrifice could be forgotten. How easily one person's selfish choices could erase decades of collective effort. He also thought about the cost of fighting back, the stress, the legal threats, the harassment. It had been worth it, but it had cost him something too. As the sun set, painting the empty pool in shades of gold and amber, Marcus made a decision. When the pool reopened, he would volunteer as a lifeguard. He would give back to the community that had fought so hard to reclaim this space. It seemed like the least he could do. But that night, alone in his house, Marcus couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. Something didn't feel finished. Some thread remained untied. He kept thinking about Derek Hendricks fleeing the state, about the search of Coren's house, about the financial crimes being investigated. What else had they hidden? What other corners of this community had they compromised? Marcus opened his laptop and pulled up the satellite imagery again, studying the property, the development, the patterns of the neighborhood. And then he saw something he'd missed before. In the satellite images from 2015, there was another structure on the property that no longer existed. A small building, approximately 40 feet by 60 feet, located behind the HOA office building. It appeared in images through 2016, then disappeared entirely by 2017. No demolition permit was filed for it. The building had just ceased to exist. Marcus pulled up the county records for that property. Nothing, no building demolition, no removal, no record of what that structure had been. His engineer's mind recognized the pattern: hidden money, hidden projects, hidden infrastructure, all pointing towards something that the current residents would never know about unless someone dug deep enough to find it. He was opening his email to contact Thomas Keefe when his phone rang. It was Raymond. Marcus, Raymond's voice sounded strained. I need to tell you something about the time capsule diary, about what Thomas Ridgemont didn't write down. Marcus's stomach tightened. What do you mean? I lied earlier when I said I didn't know Thomas buried the time capsule. I did know, because I helped him do it. And Marcus, there's more to the story, more that we buried, more that I think you need to know before this is truly over. Raymond invited Marcus to his home, a modest house 2 neighborhoods over from Ridgemont Valley. The interior was like stepping into a museum of community history. Photographs lining the walls, newspaper clippings, letters preserved in frames, artifacts of 50 years of civic engagement. Raymond made tea and gestured for Marcus to sit in a living room that smelled like old books and quiet dedication. When we formed the Ridgemont Community Trust in 1964, Raymond began, it wasn't just about creating a place to live. It was about something bigger: integration. Marcus listened as Raymond explained the history that didn't appear in the official records. In the 1960s, Ridgemont Valley had been surrounded by neighborhoods that were explicitly segregated. Redlining maps, covenant restrictions on who could own property, the legal infrastructure of racism embedded in American real estate. The Ridgemont Community Trust was founded by a coalition of religious organizations, civil rights advocates, and progressive developers who wanted to create something different. A place where people of all races, religions, and backgrounds could live together as equals. We were idealists, Raymond said. We believed that if we could build a truly integrated community, if we could show that people from different backgrounds could live together peacefully, it might shift the political landscape. It might become a model for other communities. Did it work? Marcus asked. For a time, Raymond replied. The community was genuinely integrated, Black families, white families, Asian families, Jewish families living alongside Christian families. We shared resources, made decisions collectively, treated each other with real respect. It was remarkable. For about 20 years, Ridgemont Valley was one of the most integrated communities in the state. What changed? Raymond's expression grew heavy. The market changed, the region started to develop, property values increased, and slowly people who believed in the original mission, people of color, primarily started to be priced out. Costs went up, property taxes increased. Meanwhile, people with money, people who saw an opportunity for investment returns, started buying property. The community started to shift. By the early 1980s, it was becoming a neighborhood where people wanted to live because they could make money, not because they believed in integration. And when the HOA took over, Marcus prompted. The damage accelerated, Raymond said. The people who took control of the HOA in 1989 were wealthy, mostly white, and they made decisions that reflected their interests. Higher HOA fees that priced out families with lower incomes, aesthetic codes that were applied selectively, policies that incentivized turnover among residents who couldn't afford the increasing costs. Raymond stood with difficulty and retrieved a photograph from the wall. It showed a diverse group of people, maybe 30 of them, standing together in front of the community pool during its early years, smiling, genuine joy evident in their faces. This photograph was taken in 1974, Raymond said. The original residents at a pool celebration. This is what Ridgemont Valley was supposed to be, what Thomas Ridgemont died believing in. What happened to these people? Marcus asked. They left, Raymond said quietly. As property values increased, as the community started to change, as the new HOA made it clear that the original values didn't matter anymore, they sold their homes and moved on. Some stayed through the 1990s, but eventually almost all of them were gone, replaced by wealthier residents seeking property investment. Raymond sat back down, looking exhausted by the recounting. Thomas and I talked about this extensively in the years before he died. He was devastated by what Ridgemont had become. He'd buried the time capsule as a way of bearing witness, of documenting what the community had been so that future generations might understand what had been lost. But we also did something else, something I've felt guilty about for 30 years. What? Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew. We documented everything, Raymond said. The development patterns, the census data showing how the community was becoming less diverse, the financial records showing selective enforcement of HOA rules based on residents' race. We put together a comprehensive report about the community's transformation, and we buried it too, in a different location. But we decided not to tell anyone about it. We thought it was too sensitive, too risky. We were cowards, frankly. Where? Marcus asked. Behind the HOA office, Raymond said. In a locked, waterproof container buried 4 feet underground. Thomas Ridgemont marked the location so that if someone ever dug there, if someone ever specifically looked, they would find it. He believed that someday the truth would need to come out. Marcus thought about the building that had existed in 2015 satellite imagery and disappeared by 2017. About Derek and Karen conducting their quiet crimes, possibly unaware that they were literally standing on top of buried evidence of larger historical injustices. Why are you telling me this now? Marcus asked. Because the state's investigation into the HOA fraud is only half the story, Raymond said. Yes, Karen and Derek stole money. Yes, they abandoned amenities and violated covenants. But they did those things in a community that was already compromised, that had already abandoned its founding principles. The fraud isn't separate from the community's decline. It's a symptom of it. And I think you need to understand the whole context before you decide how to proceed. Proceed with what? With whether you want to dig up that second container, Raymond said. With whether you want to bring the historical injustices to light. With whether you think Ridgemont Valley needs to confront not just the recent fraud, but the systemic racism that helped create the conditions for that fraud to flourish. Marcus felt the weight of what Raymond was asking. The pool had been about simple justice, stopping theft, reopening a facility, but this was different. This was about examining the community's soul. I need to think about this, Marcus said. Of course, Raymond replied. But I should tell you I've been contacted by a journalist named Sarah Martinez. She covers regional development and civil rights issues. She heard about the time capsule through the news coverage and contacted me. She's interested in the larger story. She wants to know about Ridgemont Valley's history, how it changed, what happened to the original residents. I haven't given her the information yet, but I will if you think it's the right move. I wanted to check with you first, because you've become the public face of this story. That evening, Marcus called Linda. There's more to this than the pool, he told her, and he explained what Raymond had shared. Linda listened thoughtfully, then said, I need to do something. I need to look at the community records we have from the early years, see if I can find anyone from the original community who still lives nearby. We need to know who was pushed out and why. Over the next week, Linda worked with Raymond to identify and contact former residents of Ridgemont Valley. The results were sobering. Of the 30 residents pictured in that 1974 photograph, 17 had relocated out of the community between 1990 and 2005. Most cited increasing costs, pressure from the HOA, or simply a sense that the community had changed and was no longer welcoming. Several were willing to share their stories. Marcus met with 3 of them: Dr. David Chen, who'd lived in Ridgemont Valley from 1971 to 1997, Margaret Johnson, who'd moved away in 1999, and James White, who'd held out until 2004. Their stories were consistent: initial welcome, genuine community, gradual exclusion. The HOA fees went up 50% in 5 years, Dr. Chen explained during a recorded interview. They said it was for improvements, but what actually happened was the board hired contractors who were friends, paid inflated rates, and the rest of us paid for their scheme. After a while, it's cheaper to sell and move than to keep paying. Margaret Johnson told a similar story. I felt targeted. Every other week, a violation notice for something ridiculous. My lawn was the wrong shade of green. My garden had too many flowers. My fence was a half-inch too tall. Meanwhile, the white families on my street never got citations. I kept records. After 3 years of collecting violation notices that never went to anyone else, I got the message. I wasn't welcome here anymore. James White was more direct. It was designed to push people like us out. I can't prove it, but I lived through it. The fees increased, the enforcement became selective, and property values in the neighborhood went down for people who looked like me while they went up for people who didn't. By the time I left, I was one of only 3 black families left in the entire community. The math was clear. Marcus documented all of this and shared it with Sarah Martinez, the journalist. Within 2 weeks, Martinez published a comprehensive article, From Integration to Exclusion: How a Pioneering Community Forgot Its Mission. The article detailed Ridgemont Valley's history as an integrated community, the systematic ways that HOA policies had been used to price out and discourage residents of color, and the connection between that exclusionary history and the recent fraud. The article ended with a simple question: is Ridgemont Valley ready to acknowledge its past and commit to restoring its founding principles, or will this opportunity be another missed chance? The piece went viral on social media. Local civil rights organizations began paying attention. Activists showed up at community meetings asking uncomfortable questions about diversity, about representation, about whether the new HOA board would do anything to repair the historical damage. Linda Chen was overwhelmed by the response. She called a community-wide meeting to discuss how to address the historical injustices that had been uncovered. We need to acknowledge what happened here, she said to the assembled residents. We need to understand that the fraud wasn't an aberration. It was consistent with how this community has been operating for decades, and we need to figure out how to make it right. The meeting was contentious. Some residents were defensive. That was 30 years ago. I wasn't even here. Why should I feel guilty? Others were reflective. If I benefited from policies that pushed out other people, I have a responsibility to acknowledge that and do better. A few were actively hostile. Why are we listening to people who chose to leave? This community doesn't owe them anything. But gradually, a consensus emerged. The community would reach out to former residents, apologize for what had happened, and commit to becoming genuinely inclusive. They would examine current HOA policies to remove any provisions that had a discriminatory impact. They would create scholarships for residents of color who couldn't afford HOA fees. And they would excavate the second-time capsule. The excavation was scheduled for a Saturday morning, and this time the media was invited. Raymond, Marcus, Linda, and volunteers worked together to carefully dig in the location that Raymond had marked decades ago. About 4 feet down, they found it. Another metal box, similar to the first, also waterproofed, also buried with intention. Inside were documents dating from 1987 to 1989, the transition period from community trust to HOA, census data showing demographic change, financial records showing selective enforcement of fees and violations, letters from residents who'd been forced out, describing their experiences, and a second diary entry from Thomas Ridgemont, written in 1988, just before his death. The community I helped build is dying. The people who made it special are being replaced by people who see it only as property investment. I worry that we will lose not just the diversity, but the understanding that community requires something more than proximity. It requires commitment, sacrifice, the willingness to see others as equals, not competitors. I'm leaving this record so that someone, someday, will know what we tried to do here. Will understand that integration didn't fail because it's impossible, but because people with more power chose to abandon it in favor of profit. The pool will outlast us. I hope whoever uses it in the future will understand what it represents. Not just water and concrete, but a commitment to shared resources, to community, to the possibility that people can build something together. The excavation became a moment of collective reckoning for Ridgemont Valley. Local media broadcast the discovery. The story spread beyond the regional news. Civil rights organizations took interest. City council members called for investigations into whether other neighborhoods in the region had similar patterns. The previous HOA board, particularly Karen Hendricks, became a symbol of a larger pattern of exclusion and corruption. Derek Hendricks was never found. He remained a fugitive, and eventually his assets were seized and distributed to compensate the community for the fraud. Karen Hendricks pled guilty to embezzlement and fraud and served 16 months in prison. By the time she was released, Ridgemont Valley had changed dramatically. The community pool had reopened to significant fanfare. The time capsules were preserved and displayed in the community center as a historical record. The neighborhood's demographics had begun to shift as the new board actively worked to recruit diverse residents and ensure inclusive policies. Marcus had become something of a community figurehead, not because he'd wanted to, but because he'd been willing to ask questions and persist when others had accepted injustice. He was sitting on his porch on a summer evening, 6 months after all the excavations and revelations, when Diane visited. "You did it," she said, settling into the chair beside him with a satisfied smile. "You actually fixed this place." "I didn't," Marcus replied. "Linda fixed it. Raymond fixed it. The residents who were willing to ask hard questions fixed it. I just asked the first question." "And kept asking," Diane said. "That's the part most people miss. They ask once, get shut down, and give up. You didn't give up." "I was pissed off about a pool," Marcus said. Diane laughed. "The best social change usually starts that way. Someone's pissed about something small, digs into it, and discovers it's connected to something much larger." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the neighborhood. Children were playing in yards. Families were preparing dinner. The community was simply being, existing in a space that had been reclaimed and renewed. "The pool's going to have its first full summer tomorrow," Marcus said. "No restrictions, open to all residents, free for families who can't afford the fees, kids like Linda's daughter who just need a place to cool off." "You should go swimming," Diane said. "I probably will," Marcus replied. That night, Marcus slept better than he had in over a year. But in his dreams, he found himself back at the pool, watching it being filled with water after years of emptiness. And at the bottom of the pool, just before it flooded, he could see more boxes, more buried truths, more community stories waiting to be unearthed. He realized that what he'd uncovered in Ridgemont Valley wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Every community had its own buried history. Every neighborhood had its own time capsules containing forgotten promises and abandoned principles. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished.